Long before Galana Oil Kenya existed, there was another business called Galana Petroleum. Now, Galana Petroleum and Galana Oil Kenya, they were never the same company. Galana Petroleum operated in Kenya before eventually shutting down its Kenyan operations. When it left behind more than empty offices. It also left behind a name that people in the industry already recognized. Normally, that's where the story ends. A company closes, its logo disappears, its name filed away with the rest of the business history. This isn't what happened here. 3 friends, they looked at the situation differently. George Kahira, Sheetal, Khanna, and Joseph Mburu. Each came from a different professional background. George had worked at Galana Petroleum, Sheetal was a trained pharmacist, Joseph came from insurance and business. And they were not trying to resurrect Galana Petroleum, they were trying to build something of their own. So in June 2000, they registered an entirely new Kenyan company, a completely independent business that simply retained the Galana name because they believed it still had value. So the name survived, but the company didn't. Once Galana Oil Kenya existed, nobody handed it customers, nobody handed it infrastructure, nobody handed it contracts. The founders inherited a name. Everything else had to be built from the ground up. There is something almost ironic about the way Galana Oil Kenya began. Today, when you hear the name Galana Energies, you probably think of service stations, fuel tankers, and a company that imports petroleum into Kenya. If you had walked into the company's first office in the year 2000, you would have seen none of that. Just 3 founders and a small office at Palmhouse in Nairobi. George Kahira understood the petroleum business because he lived in it. His years at Galana Petroleum had exposed him to how fuel moved across borders, how commercial customers bought it, and how the industry operated behind the scenes. Sheetal Khanna came from pharmacy, like we said before, and Joseph Mburu came from insurance and business. This meant that each founder looked at the same business from a different angle. Palmhouse became Galana Oil Kenya's first office. It was where the founders had to answer the hardest question any new business faces. Why should anyone trust us? Now, it's good to note that Galana did not begin by importing fuel. I know that feels obvious today because importation has become such a central part of its identity. But in 2000, Galana simply wasn't there yet. The founders bought fuel that was already inside Kenya from established oil marketing companies. They then supplied that fuel to commercial customers and other resellers. It was a far less glamorous business than owning petrol stations, but it was probably the smartest place to start. Think about the alternatives. Building a retail network would have required land, construction, equipment, and enormous amounts of capital. Importing petroleum required international suppliers, financing, storage agreements, and regulatory approvals. A young company could spend years chasing those ambitions before making its first sale. Commercial supply was different. If you could convince a transporter, a factory, a contractor, or a business running a fleet of vehicles that you would deliver fuel when you promised, you had a customer. And if you kept doing that consistently, that customer often became a long-term relationship. That was the real business Galana was building in those early years. Relationships. Those years were spent building a dependable customer base. As the customer base grew, so did Galana's ambitions. The company expanded into exports and transit fuels, serving Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Those regional relationships, they exposed the founders to a much larger petroleum market than Kenya alone. But success also revealed a weakness. Every liter Galana sold, it depended on somebody else's supply. If another marketer controlled availability, Galana had limited control. If another marketer controlled price, Galana felt it. The founders had managed to build customers, but they still did not control the product reaching those customers. If Galana wanted to decide its own future, was it finally time to stop buying fuel from other marketers and begin importing its own? By the mid-2000s, Galana had proved it could build customers. What it had not proved was whether it could control its own future. Every liter it sold, it still depended on fuel that had first passed through another oil marketing company. That arrangement had helped the company survive its early years, but it also imposed a ceiling on how far it could grow. The obvious answer seems simple today. Import your own fuel. In reality, that was one of the hardest steps any Kenyan oil marketer could take. Importation was not simply a matter of ordering a ship. It required international suppliers, financing large petroleum cargoes, compliance with technical and regulatory standards, access to storage, pipeline infrastructure, and a place inside a national system that coordinated petroleum imports. Now, for us to understand why the 2007 mattered, we have to understand the open tender system. It's usually shortened to OTS. I know OTS sounds like another piece of industry jargon, but let me tell you guys, it changed the way petroleum entered Kenya. Kenya imports refined petroleum products for the whole country. If every licensed marketer independently brought in ships whenever they wanted, the result would be congestion, duplicated costs, and an inefficient supply chain. The open tender system was designed to solve that problem. Under OTS, licensed oil marketing companies, they compete for the right to import a cargo on behalf of the industry. The successful company imports the shipment, after which participating marketers receive their allocated quantities. It's a competitive system, but it's also a cooperative one because one cargo serves many companies. Now that will help us understand Galana's next milestone. The company was no longer talking about buying fuel that somebody else had already imported. It was preparing to become one of the companies trusted to bring petroleum into Kenya's supply chain. Then came 2007. Galana entered Kenya's open tender system and began importing petroleum cargoes. On paper, that looks like a single milestone in a timeline. In reality, it marked the moment the company stopped depending entirely on other marketers and stepped into a much larger part of Kenya's petroleum value chain. It was no longer only selling fuel, it had become part of the system that brought fuel into the country. That opened the door to everything that followed: larger commercial customers, stronger regional trade, retail expansion, and eventually, the Delta service stations. If Galana could now import fuel, why remain invisible behind commercial supply? Why not build a brand that ordinary Kenyans could see every day as they drove past a service station? Ask almost any Kenyan whether they know Delta, and you'll probably get an immediate answer. For years, the blue and yellow canopy, it was part of everyday life. Now ask a different question. Who owned Delta? That's where the room goes shh. For a long time, most Kenyans knew the brand far better than they knew the company behind it. While Galana had spent years building relationships with commercial customers and growing into fuel importation, the average motorist barely knew the name Galana. What they knew was Delta. From a business perspective, it made perfect sense. Retail fuel is a different world from commercial supply. A transporter buying hundreds of thousands of liters cares about reliability, price, and delivery schedules. An ordinary driver notices something else first: the brand on the station canopy. Recognition matters. After strengthening its position in supply and importation, Galana expanded into retail through the Delta network. Overnight, the company was no longer operating largely behind the scenes. It had a public face that millions of Kenyans could see. This was much more than adding service stations. Every new Delta outlet became a place where the public interacted with a company they had never really heard of. People were building a relationship with Galana without realizing they were doing so. In Galana's case, Delta became a bridge. It gave the company visibility, strengthened its retail presence, and helped it compete in a market where motorists made decisions in seconds as they drove past a forecourt. And yet, another question was beginning to emerge. If Delta had earned so much recognition, why would the company ever consider moving away from a name that so many Kenyans already knew? The name on the stations would eventually change, bringing the corporate identity and the public identity together under one banner: Galana Energies. For almost 2 decades, Galana had built a business that most Kenyans couldn't see. The company imported fuel, it traded petroleum across borders, it supplied commercial customers, it won open tender cargoes, it expanded into LPG, lubricants, and regional markets. Yet, if you stopped an ordinary motorist at a petrol station and asked who was serving them, most would probably answer with one word: Delta. When Galana entered retail in 2007, it deliberately chose to build its forecourt business under the Delta name. The first station was Delta Flamingo Service Station in Nakuru. From then on, Delta became the public face, while Galana Oil Kenya remained the company operating behind it. Thousands of motorists knew the stations. Very few knew the business behind them. And for years, that worked. The Delta brand continued growing, while Delta quietly expanded into something much larger than a retail network. It wasn't simply operating petrol stations anymore. It was importing petroleum through Kenya's open tender system. It was financing international cargoes. It was trading fuel. It was supplying commercial and industrial customers. It was exporting into neighboring countries. It was building businesses in LPG, lubricants, fuel card services, convenience retail, and later, auto gas. At some point, the company had to confront an uncomfortable reality. The public recognized the stations, but they didn't recognize the company. The name creating value wasn't the name building the business. Imagine spending years constructing a nationwide energy company only for your customers to know the sign above the canopy and not the organization behind it. That disconnect became harder to justify as the business evolved because the company had also outgrown another word, oil. When Galana Oil Kenya was established in June 2000, that name accurately described what the founders were building, a Kenyan oil marketing company. But years later, the business had become far broader. It was no longer defined by one product. Its activities stretched across fuel importation and international trading, retail and commercial fuels, exports and transit, LPG, lubricants, convenience retail, fuel card services, auto gas, and other emerging energy solutions. Calling that business Galana Oil had become increasingly narrow. The name described where the company had started, not what it had become. That's why the rebrand mattered. It was the business finally catching up with its own reality. The company, it adopted a single identity, Galana Energies. One name, one business, one public face. The word energies carried its own message. It suggested movement beyond traditional petroleum, beyond one commodity, beyond one era. It reflected a company that wanted to be recognized as an energy business rather than simply an oil marketer, one already operating across multiple energy-related products and positioning itself for an industry that was beginning to think beyond conventional fuels. But every rebrand comes with a price. Years of customer familiarity are placed at risk. Station signage must change. Documents, uniforms, branding, marketing material and digital systems, they must all be replaced. Customers have to learn a new name. Some inevitably wonder whether ownership has changed. Customers have to learn a new name. Some inevitably wonder whether ownership has changed. Others just assume that the old company disappeared. Galana accepted those risks because the alternative carried its own cost, continuing to grow while remaining hidden behind another brand. By the time Galana adopted one identity in 2023, the company had already moved into several different parts of the energy business. The most visible remains retail. Galana now operates 90 service stations across Kenya. Those stations, they sell petrol and diesel to motorists, and some also include convenience shops and sell lubricants and LPG. The forecourt is the part most people recognize. But for Galana, retail is only the final stage of a much longer chain. Behind the stations is the supply and trading business. Galana sources and imports petroleum products, distributes them through Kenya's storage and pipeline system, and supplies other marketers as well as its own customers. It also sells fuel in bulk to transport companies, industrial operations, construction businesses, institutions, and organizations that store fuel on site. The company has also served regional markets, including Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo through export and transit arrangements. Fuel is only one part of the current portfolio. In 2010, Galana entered a partnership with Emirates National Oil Company and became the Kenyan distributor of Enoch lubricants. The range covers passenger vehicles, motorcycles, trucks, and industrial machinery. The partnership moved Galana beyond fuel supply into the sale of oils used to reduce friction, control heat, and protect engines and equipment. Then there is LPG. Galana sells liquefied petroleum gas under the Galana gas name. It has the 6 kilogram, 13 kilogram, and 50 kilogram cylinders, alongside bulk supply for larger commercial users such as hotels, restaurants, and industrial sites. Galana also provides delivery, installation, and maintenance services for LPG systems, together with safety guidance. This is a different market from petrol and diesel. LPG is stored under pressure and requires dedicated cylinders, valves, regulators, and handling procedures. For households, it's mainly used for cooking. For larger users, it can supply kitchens, heating systems, and some industrial processes. Galana's move into LPG therefore extended the business from transport fuel into domestic and commercial energy use. The company has also started developing autogas services where LPG is used as a motor fuel in vehicles fitted with conversion systems. Autogas remains a newer part of the Kenyan market, so here we can just describe it as an emerging line of business than a mature national operation. For organizations with vehicle fleets, Galana also operates a fuel card service. A company can issue cards to authorized drivers, set spending controls, and use transaction records to monitor where and when fuel is purchased. The service station model has also been changing. In July 2024, Galana launched the first Breeze convenience shop at one of its Thika Road stations. Breeze outlets, they stock drinks, the Fanta, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, snacks, apples, and basic everyday items. Some locations also include Java on-the-go coffee counters through a partnership with Java House. This places Galana inside a wider shift in fuel retail. Service stations, they are increasingly being designed as short stops where motorists can buy food or household items while refueling. For the company, that creates a non-fuel retail business alongside the forecourt. For the customer, it changes what can be done during a stop. Commercial growth is one side of the company Galana has become. The other appears through the Galana Foundation. Galana has supported secondary school students since 2008, initially through scholarships and partner organizations. In 2023, it established the Galana Energies Foundation to coordinate that work more directly. As at July 2026, the foundation is currently sponsoring 134 students through secondary education in national schools across Kenya. It covers school fees and related educational costs. Each student is also paired with a Galana mentor. Seen together, Galana's present-day operations are much broader than the petrol station network that first introduced the company to most motorists. It imports and trades fuel, it supplies businesses and institutions, it operates stations, distributes lubricants, sells LPG, runs fuel card services, and has moved into convenience retail. And through its foundation, it's also paying for students to remain in school and linking them with mentors. That breadth explains why the company chose to replace Galana Oil and Delta with one name, Galana Energies.